You build on top of the model with your own data instead of just using something that everyone can tap into.
I think the CTO from Anthropic was on their board, and then he quit the day before launching a competitor.
The intelligence overtook the top tier models, but the costs stay the same.
We've been talking about how the AI is actually giving us more work to do, not less.
Did you see the news about Palantir doubling their revenue last year because of sovereign AI provided for corporations?
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I know the Palantir CEO has been talking about this recently, has been very outspoken about it, that all companies should have their own AI basically run locally and not just send all of their know-how and data to the big labs, which later can become their own competitor, which we know has happened. Probably the most notorious case is the one with Figma, right? With I think the CTO from Anthropic was on their board, and then he quit the day before launching a competitor to Figma. Yeah, so it's interesting because I do see a lot of new local AI models becoming increasingly better, even from some major labs like Meta and some other ones. So it does seem like local models are starting to win, right? They're getting a lot of traction for sure.
And it makes a lot of sense for companies because, as you said, if you send all your data to the big labs and they really need to figure out revenue model, then they have all the incentives to take the good parts and try to build a business about it. So Cursor was another example, right? They relied on Anthropic and Claude, and then they built Claude Code instead of working with them. So there are definitely some examples in the past. So all the big companies should be worried that they might be the next one. So it makes all the reasons to just switch to your proprietary implementations.
Yeah, and to be honest, that probably is a huge reason, deal-breaking reason why some big companies especially can't work with the big AI labs. But it's probably not the only reason, right? There are other reasons as well. So one is cost, for example. With a local model, you can run things a lot cheaper for big portion of the work that an AI model needs to do. And then you also have some, the Chinese alternatives, not necessarily local ones, but through the API. So that can be an alternative, but maybe not everyone wants to run or trust the Chinese model. So that's another issue. And then you have the latency factor as well. Maybe you have some tasks that you don't want to have them go through the cloud from the AI labs. So there are a bunch of factors that why companies are starting to consider, and not just companies, but also individuals.
Also in the application layer, right? Even above the model, would you work with a software company that just is a wrapper around AI and they take your data to train their own platform, and then your competitors can sign up for the same tool and essentially kind of be little parasites on your data? Or do you go your own way and build your own application layer? To me, that makes the most sense, right? That you build on top of the model with your own data instead of just using something that everyone can tap into.
That's true. So let's start discussing some of these latest local AI model announcements that we've seen in the past week. So the biggest one is probably the one from Meta. So they've just released this Meta Muse Glimmer model that seems to be focused on agentic work and coding. What do you know about this? Does it seem like a good model? I know they said it should be better than Gemma 4, which is a bit old at this point, which is Google's own open source model. But it's interesting that, they're trying to become kind of frontier, in these smaller 30 billion parameter, models that you can run locally.
I mean, the benchmarks look pretty interesting. I haven't had a chance to run it on my own yet, and I don't think they released the open weights just yet. It's supposed to happen in a week or two. So that's going to be also interesting once you can self-host it and see how it performs on your own infrastructure. But I like the focus on being agentic focus. So they are starting to do more niche models on specific tasks instead of big large language model that's very generic and it can run a chat app that can run anything. It might be quite an interesting one for businesses to use around their workflows.
I believe they say this too, but generally speaking, if you run a 30 billion parameter model, you need at least 24, 32 gigabytes of either unified RAM or VRAM, right?
Yeah, maybe we will start really spending more money on local RAM so we can run all these locally. And it's kind of going to be the norm. It used to be that we got stuck on 16, 48 gigabytes of RAM. Now maybe the norm will be hundreds because you need to run models locally, at least on professional machines. Yeah, it will be super beneficial when you can avoid all the latency, all the cost, you run it locally. Hopefully your MacBook doesn't get too hot, but we will see how that goes.
That would be amazing for sure. I would definitely want, machines and laptops with a lot more RAM. The only thing is RAM and memory is very expensive. It's probably going to be very expensive for the next 2 years at least. Everyone is very high demand, not necessarily from consumers, more from the AI labs.
And they say it's very hard to scale the production. So it's really hard to double the output of all the factories. So yeah, the supply will be constrained and it's going to be pushing prices higher. I think Apple already almost doubled the RAM upgrade prices. So it's going to be pretty pricey to get proper local setup.
Yeah, cost is definitely going to be a factor, but at least if we can get that higher amount of RAM, right? Because it's very limited right now. The volume is very limited, so they are not even putting higher amounts of RAM in devices, in consumer devices, even if it's more expensive. But hopefully, at least Apple will start pushing this more aggressively over the next year or two.
And maybe that's gonna be their back win in AI. It's not gonna be the models, it's not gonna be the new Siri, but it's gonna be their hardware that they can actually make it so good that people building with AI will buy all the MacBooks in the world and all the Mac studios they can.
Moving on to the next big announcement, a new model from Nvidia, the Nemotron 3.5 Lightning AI, which seems to be much more efficient. So it's not competing directly with the Meta one. It's more for lower level, lower intelligence tasks and doing them very efficiently. I believe it's around the same level as Gemini 2.5 Flash, which I know can be pretty useful for some agentic tasks as well. So this is interesting. I'll probably want to try this myself pretty soon.
I like that Nvidia is really pushing the open weight models and trying to dominate the whole stack of AI. So they are not just the GPU provider or a chip provider, but they're actually trying to capture the whole of the market. Right now, the benchmarks don't look too great compared to the top tier models, but at the same time, there are a lot of tasks that you can actually do without the smartest models. And if it performs like LLMs a year ago, it was good enough for a lot of tasks. So we not always need a frontier. And if it's cost efficient, could be very useful for a lot of workflows.
Yeah, Nvidia is definitely one of the bigger players that is really pushing open source models and optimizing them, as fast as they can. Of course, they don't have, I guess they have the capital, but maybe they don't have the teams or even the, the incentive to, push this much, really compete with OpenAI and Anthropic at a high level.
Plus, they can see there is competition from China, right? So they don't have to push it in order for the industry to go forward. Maybe if it wasn't the case, or if they actually end up banning Chinese models in the US, they will push much harder on their own.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm glad to see it. So we are seeing Nvidia, we're seeing Meta starting to push this quite aggressively right now. Everyone, or at least a bunch of people that are some influential voices, are starting to call on Google to also open source Gemini itself, so not just Gemma. We'll see. It should be in their ethos, like what Google used to be and mean, right, for a lot of people. But I guess we'll have to see if they go back to that kind of thing. And then, we've been talking here recently about Grok being open sourced, right? Or at least some variants of Grok at some point. So hopefully we'll see more open source models going forward, even from the big companies, right?
It looks like it's coming, right? Because there doesn't seem to be that much money in models. It needs to be in the application layer and the businesses around it, judging by how much loss all these big labs have. So it seems like the future. And there's a lot of companies who have other businesses. Like Google doesn't rely on AI API usage, right? They have everything else running in their ecosystem, so they don't need the revenue. But that could be the deciding point, that they actually push for open weight. They release everything and they earn their money elsewhere.
Yeah, it seems right now the companies that really make their revenue from hardware or from advertising, which is Meta and Google, are really the best ones positioned to really push forward the open weight models and make them as good as possible.
And Google knows that we will always tap into their services, right? Like even the AI agents, they will always use some layer in their stack. So it's not like they're going to be left behind. It's in everyone's interest if every single company in the world is spinning hundreds or thousands of AI agents, be it on closed source or open source models, but they know that it's beneficial for them.
So the next announcement we have from Liquid AI, it's a vision model, vision specialized model. So you can use it to analyze visually things on your screen. I'm actually quite excited about this one, and I want to try it as soon as possible, because right now, for example, if I want, in my marketing agency, if I want to analyze and break down some static ads or even video ads, I tend to rely on Gemini a lot, and can be a bit slow. That's why I tend to prefer Flash, for example, like especially if I make it go through like hundreds of ads at once and swipe files and whatnot. So, and it also costs a bit of money, right, to do all of these tasks. So I'm excited to see if this local model is any good at that. And we have another story here from Onslaught that you can train your own and fine tune your own model. So I want to see if I can further fine tune this model for my specific task. That's what I'm planning to do next.
Yeah, I think fine tuning is having a comeback. It used to be a thing back in the day when LLM started, that everybody wanted to fine tune their models based on the large ones, because we thought that's the most efficient way to make it behave in a way we want. Then context engineering came in, and we realized that we can push it very, very far by just injecting the right context into this context window. But now it really seems like we are coming to full circle, because from my experience, when you overload context with a lot of data about a company, the internals, it just becomes so restricted, and it dumbs the model down in a way that you start getting worse results, especially for like copywriting tasks and brainstorming. It feels like the models just became like boxed into their context, and they just stop thinking outside of it. So hopefully fine-tuning could be the answer to it, that we don't have to overload it and we can make it behave the right way.
The way I'm thinking about it recently is, let's say you're learning from all of these sources and guides and whatnot, and building skills, for example, for your AI agent. But I see them as tools, right? Like you're just gathering the tools. Okay, all of those are amazing tools, but your AI won't know to just use whatever is best to do something. Like it's too general of a task if you prompt it that way, right? So you'll not get an amazing outcome if you just treat it like that and use it like that. But you will have to know, okay, which tool should I use for a specific task? At least it can get you to a point, right? You can say that, like what I just said. You can say, okay, use the best, skills, one of the best skills you have for this, or a bunch of them. But to still get you to like a baseline, you still need to get involved and like fine tune it and say, now use this one and now use this other one. Now do this, right? With that skill. So that's how I see it right now, like the way you can use the AI.
Yeah, I've seen benchmarks of some fine-tuned models. I don't remember which exactly it was, but it was one of the open weight models that like intelligence was, let's say, 2/3 of the top tier models, but it was much cheaper. So probably DeepSeek or something in that nature. And then once they fine-tune it, the intelligence overtook the top tier models, but the costs stay the same. So maybe that's the gap that you could bridge when you fine-tune the model, that you push the intelligence to the top tier, but you keep the cost down.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's really about curation, right? I think this is kind of making a comeback as well, because I know, people used to talk about, curation on the internet, right? Like initially we only had like, a few sources of information, like everyone was kind of going to them. And eventually we had like a lot, like it was overwhelming. Like we have so much information on the internet, right? Like which one do you, so then curation, like, website, whether it's like, news websites or, YouTubers or whatever it was, like someone to curate all of that information for you and really give you like the best stuff, right? So I think that's happening also with, AI agents right now. You need to curate, how you're building things, right? So like you still need a human for that right now. And I don't think we're going to see, I don't want to make like wild predictions. We're probably not going to see it very soon. Some super intelligence that can do all of this stuff much better than we can as humans. The curation.
Yeah, I think there's that last 5-10% for every single task, which you just kind of need that human in the loop, or at least the creation of your data set to cross that last 10%. And without it, like if you make all the tasks to 90%, it's just great. It speeds everything up. but without the judgment and taste of a person handling it, it's never going to be like fully automated unless you can push it to 100. I think it's the same with like self-driving cars, right? Like we can always get to 95. It drives, most of the time it drives by itself very nicely, no issues. But then there's the edge cases where if you didn't have a human driver, then people die. So it's going to be kind of the same with LLMs.
Yeah, so just to talk a little bit about some of my workflows, something I've been working a lot with the agent to create new workflows and also optimize them, right, to give me the outcomes I want. So first of all, workflows need to be very specific. I want like exactly this type of like ad, right? If we're talking about making ads. So if you want another type of ad, like you need to create a whole new workflow for that, right? And fine tune it and make sure you get the result you want. And this takes a lot of time, easily takes tens of hours for each one of these, right? I do find that the ROI is there eventually, because if you think like you're going to use that dozens, hundreds of times in the future, and it takes you like a few tens of hours, 20, 30, 50 hours to like create that workflow, and then it's basically done. Either it might still require like, human in the loop thing where you need to review like a middle step or a couple of middle steps and, okay, that looks good, go on to the next thing. But some of them I find that can also be completely automated, right? Of course, it's more the like easier ones, the simpler ones, but we're getting there like, step by step, and it requires more of my time to further optimize them if I want them to make stuff that's more complex and use this other thing and this other thing. Like, so it becomes more complex. It requires more of my time to put into it to continue to optimize that to get the result I want for that more complex thing. But yeah, so just like concrete example, I may ask you to do the research on something like some certain area, some outcome I want, and then create the copy. And I usually need to review that copy because it's not great. And it depends a lot on the model. And usually I have like a mixture of models thing, a mixture of agents that can review like 3 advisors with 1 judge. And it picks, the best one. The judge picks the best one. And something else I'm trying now is just 1 judge with a model, with a different model to review that copy. I'm still working on that. It's not quite there yet, right? The mixture one seems to be okay, but it's a bit loaded. It's kind of heavy as a step in the process. So that's why I want to have like a single individual judge, ideally. But yeah, so in some cases, I can create like a whole. I heard someone say this like a run book. So basically like a series of steps that can do like from beginning to end and using like different skills and whatnot. So yeah, it works in some cases, but it's still like a very much a work in progress.
So where do you find like the most failures? Is it like the planning stage that you need to micromanage it early on, or is it the execution?
It was really, in this case, it was really the copy stage. We've talked about this before. It seems like the models are getting worse at copy for some reason.
They are like or maybe we are raising our standards. Maybe it could be an alternative, but the copy is not there yet.
I feel like we need to handhold them a lot for copy right now. So that's really the main step. So the copy really needs to be good before you actually generate the ads that use that copy, because otherwise you generate the ads and then you notice, oh, it's bad copy. Now re-edit those ads, which can work. And I've done this very early on because I didn't realize I had to like really make sure the copy was good before I generate the ads. But yeah, you can fix the copy, and after that, it's pretty much done. The ads can have a template I've built, and that can take a few steps also, like to make sure that, because initially like it gets, you get like a broken output, the CTA is not where it's supposed to be, this text is not where it's supposed to be. So first you need to optimize that template and then have it save it. So have the AI agent save it. And I find, at least my agent, it works, it's pretty reliable. Like it does save it. And every time I call it out and I mention it, use that template, it works perfectly.
I think for copywriting, maybe the fine tuning we talked about before could be the right way, that you actually fine tune a model on the copy you liked. And like you do a prompt, do you do final output that you spend 2 hours fine tuning? You create a data set of 200 examples, and that could be enough to actually make it a better copywriter. And then you could have that fine-tune model like a sub-agent that just creates copy for your ads. And that could maybe eliminate that hand-holding.
So that's the thing. So you can give it other sources, like, here is this amazing piece of copy and this amazing piece of copy. But then, as you said, like as you mix multiple together, it can kind of get weird and not really know how to use it. So you still need that step of fine tuning. Like, no, don't do that part, do this instead. No, don't do that part, do this instead. So once you nail this process and it really comes out exactly the structure you want, exactly the style and tone that you want, then you can say, okay, save this and now use exactly this format the next time you make ads like this. But it will not work for other types of ads or other types of copy that you need to start this whole thing from scratch.
But with fine tuning, maybe it could work. Like if you create a data set with specific prompts, then the output that you like, and you can, in the prompt, you can still differentiate different types and copywriting styles, and it could pick up the pattern. So it could still be doable. But with the ad creatives you mentioned, when, it just puts CTA in different places, what I found the best with workflows is when you try to make it more deterministic instead of probabilistic, because like models just like to do crazy stuff. But if you restrict it a lot and you essentially, let's say you create 50 templates for ad creatives that just work, like CTA is in the middle, title is above it. There's still room for customizations, but like this is a given layout and you just give it a lot of restrictions, it tends to give more predictable results.
So how do you restrict it? Like, what do you mean? How do you make it more structured?
But in this case, you could literally give it templates, right? You could give it a template gallery that could be, here is 50 UI templates for ad creatives that work. And you can customize on top of them, but you can only change fonts. You can only change font size. Don't change the layout, and maybe give it restrictions, right? That you can change the font size, but only by 20%, lower or higher. So it meets some criteria, but it builds on top of the model that works, right? The CTA is placed certain way, there's certain contrast and so on. Then you switch the image, you switch the typography, you do a few tweaks, but it's restricted in the box of what you approved.
I have found recently that when giving it some like high quality template, like actual templates, not just to ask it, to use vision to analyze this ad and then make another one like it, which can work okay as well, but sometimes it gets completely broken. But when I actually gave it templates, it seems to work like much better. I'm still playing with that. I'm still testing some things. When it tends to break a lot for me is, so let's say I saved the brand guidelines, the brand sheet, all of that stuff, colors, typography and whatnot, logo, right? And I just say, use that brand's brand. And for some reason, it also breaks the layout and like everything. So like all of them come out like the same, like very simple, broken, like, no creativity. So when I try to apply that branding, even if I say later, now, do more like this, like it doesn't work. Like as soon as I apply the branding thing, it breaks. I'm not sure I'm not sure if I say the wrong thing for the branding, template, or somehow this type of command breaks everything else after or something.
Do you use image generation for creating those ad creatives like altogether? Because it might be better like not to image generate the whole thing, but kind of like compose it together, that the agent creates the background image, for example, but then there is like a layer that's actual code that puts it on top of each other. So it takes the image, puts the button on it, puts the text on it. So it doesn't generate the text itself. And then it can really go outside of the restrictions you give it.
Yeah, that's
so not everything has to be image generating model. That's the thing, that in all those workflows, only certain tasks need to use actually proper AI and generating images, but some can be composed easily with just code, and then it can't mess it up.
What you're saying reminds me of the story we talked about recently with the Prime agent that used code execution to win all of those games instead of just vision. It kind of reminds me of that approach. Yeah, that's an interesting, something I guess I need to try. So what have you found in your own agency recently in terms of like workflows or failures, wins?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest struggle, to be honest, is that a lot of it still needs a human in the loop. I'm kind of coming to peace with the fact that you can't fully delegate it to AI agent, but it needs to still rely on some of your input. So integrating it into your Slack and asking for like fine-tuning directions is... yeah, it's something that you really need to accept at some point, that it's not going to run by itself automatically, but you will need to delegate it and direct it. That's one of the things that you really need to take on. And most importantly, the kind of removing AI from everything. So like not everything needs to be LLM. So you give it tools that are more deterministic, that actually like the ad composition, right? That it has tools to put things together, and it doesn't need to decide how to do it. It uses code under the hood. So you kind of build like micro tools for your AI agents to do some of those things that they tend to mess up. Like the image generation is so unpredictable that you can generate the background, but compose it together. So if you're building like landing pages, you just can't use image generation because it's going to look awful. But you can use compositions and layers, and you can give it a gallery of templates for 100 different sections, and it can have a description for every single section. What's the good use case? What are the tools they can use to customize them? But it always has boundaries, so they don't image generate landing pages, but they decide how to compose them from existing elements, and that tends to perform better. So essentially restricting agents, that kind of becomes a theme.
So now I'm thinking like specifically based on this, idea you said of not using just image generation. What if I use like photo editing tool, like let's say Canva, and I use its MCP to ask it to generate what I want, this ad for me, and make it use its own tools, like the layers thing and the buttons it might have and all of that stuff, and just kind of edit it like a human would edit. But instead of like generating like one shot thing, like an ad, just build it kind of like a human would build through the Canva tools. What do you think about that approach?
It could work. The only challenge is that those tools seem to have quite complex MCP and tool usage. So the agents tend to get confused quite a bit. So the simpler, the better. So at the same time, for the ad creatives, you can literally use a coding agent to create a mini tool that just does the ad composition instead of relying on the big tool set of Canva. Like, the way I look at it is you need to eliminate the number of things that the agent can do wrong. So if you give it 100 tools and it can only needs 5, and if it uses any of the other ones, it can just mess up everything. Ideally, you just give it the 5 tools that need with restrictions. And you really treat it like, if it's an employee who is the first time on the job, you don't give them keys to everything, right? Like you don't give them production API keys to your server. You just kind of like ease them into the job, and you give them the minimal amount of things they need to perform the tasks they have to handle. So that's how I try to look at it. Did you assume it's kind of dumb, and AI just needs to be restricted as much as possible?
I would say, that's a realistic approach, and you're probably like very correct on that. But that's what we want. Like we want to tell AI, build me a spaceship, and it just builds a spaceship. You don't want to think about like which tools does it need to build a spaceship.
I always look at it through, when you read about how McDonald's works, right? They hire young people with no work experience, and they have very structured processes on how to do absolutely everything, right? So like how to fry the fries, how to do the burger, like everything has like step-by-step implementation. And you can take a guy who never had a job in his life, you give them all this information he needs, and he's the best at making burgers in 2 days. So that's kind of how you need to approach AI. Like you can't assume that it's going to be Michelin star chef burger. It's going to be the guy who can flip it when the timer goes on, and you need to give him the timer and the grill.
Yeah, I do think that's what we need to do. That's why it feels like more work, and that's why we've been talking about how the AI is actually giving us more work to do, not less. Because we need to front load a lot of, ultimately we're building systems. And if we are, the way I'm thinking about it is like that, right? Like I want to build a system that kind of almost runs itself, but might still need some input, but you need a lot of systems, like, smaller systems. Like I said, like build me this type of ad, now this type, but I need a lot of ads, right? And it's not just ads that I need other stuff. So it's dozens and dozens of systems. But you need to front load all of that work of building the system, and then it kind of runs itself, right? With your supervision.
Yeah, I think the planning phase of the workflow is the most important. Like you really need to figure out what steps go into creating the outcome you want, and then kind of orchestrate it in a way that the agent has minimal amount of mistakes to make. And yeah, it's the most important to structure it. Like the way I like to do it is just kind of freestyle it in Cloud Code. So essentially take a task and do it by hand in Cloud Code, and then identify what tool it needed to use, where I spend like 2 hours prompting it to fix a small mistake. And you kind of find the weak spots, and then you orchestrate it into workflow that eventually can run almost by itself.
Yeah, I agree. Like that's what I find also. Like you basically need to go through. So you're saying you need to plan it, but you need to do the work yourself. Like you need to do that workflow yourself, see what breaks at every step, see what you need to spend time on, like you said, and then figure out, okay, I can do this here and I can do this here. And then eventually you get that, semi-automated flow.
Exactly. So you do the task kind of manually, and then you figure it out, what were the steps, how you can reduce all the failures and map it out into workflow that can scale.
Awesome. Well, I am excited about, continuing to improve the workflows and making more workflows. So it's an exciting time for sure. It does take a lot of time, but I feel like the reward is worth it. And I would say this for like all businesses out there, like see what you need to do a lot of times. First of all, like what work needs to be repeated, go through that manually, try to create that workflow manually, or if you know it already, start working on, having the AI automated, but do it in multiple steps initially. Like do this first part and then this second part, right? Until you get all of those parts, done properly. And then you can just tie it together and say like, okay, now save this, right? And now do all of this until this step and until you get to the whole thing and have it done automatically in the future.
Yeah, exactly. It's simple, but it's not easy. That's the conclusion essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll have another show next week. We'll wait you to see it.
Yeah, see you in the next one.